Well, we'll go ahead and get started. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Greg Gilligan. I'm the Communications Director at RVA 757 Connects. Thank you for joining us for this important and very exciting program today, where we're going to be discussing the game-changing moves that are taking place down in Petersburg by Civica to produce affordable insulin. It's worthy to note that a year ago in February this month, we at RVA 757 Connects started our virtual innovation spotlight series, and the first one that we did was on flow. So it's kind of interesting that we've kind of come full circle that we're also now talking about another pharmaceutical company. I just want to we'll have a word today from our sponsor, which is the PRA Group. I'll give you an update on RVA 757 Connects. Then we'll dive into today's topic on Civica. We'll leave some time for questions and answers, and I'll let you know what's coming up next. I just want to make sure everyone knows that we are recording this session, and it will be available on our website and our YouTube channel shortly afterwards in the next day or two. For those of you who are on the call, I will email out the link to everybody. And also, if you do have questions, use the chat function to be able to send questions to me so that we can go ahead and get that taken care of during the Q&A sessions towards the end of the program. You know, our RVA 757 Connects is a nonprofit organization, and so we rely on corporate donations. One of our corporate supporters is the PRA Group, which is based in Norfolk. Here today to tell us more about the PRA Group is Laura White. Laura is the company's Chief Risk and Compliance Officer. And in that role, Laura has primarily responsibilities for the day-to-day implementation and oversight of PRA Group's risk management programs. She has direct and regular access to the PRA Group's board of directors and reports to the board's risk committee. She has more than 25 years of leadership experience in the financial services industry. She was previously the Chief Risk and Compliance Officer for Alliance Global Assistance in the Americas. And before joining Alliance, I should say, she was the Senior Manager of Corporate Planning for the Federal Reserve Bank of Richmond. She was a commissioned bank examiner, and she was a Senior Financial Analyst for Capital One Financial Corp. She earned her bachelor's in accounting from Virginia Commonwealth University, and Laura also serves on the board of RVA 757 Connect. So Laura, I will turn it over to you.
Thank you, Greg. As Greg said, I'm Laura White, Chief Risk and Compliance Officer for PRA Group and a member of the Board of Directors of RVA 757. And it is my pleasure to be here today for this webinar. Next slide. As many of you may know, PRA Group recently celebrated a very special occasion, 20 years since we debuted on the NASDAQ Stock Exchange and joined the ranks of the world's most innovative and growth-oriented companies. We celebrated this milestone by ringing the NASDAQ stock market closing bell at the crossroads of the world in Times Square, New York. Next slide. In 1996, our president and CEO, Kevin Stevenson, co-founded PRA Group in Norfolk, Virginia, which remains the home to our international headquarters. Next slide. PRA Group is a global leader in acquiring and servicing non-performing loans, returning capital to banks and other creditors to help expand financial services for consumers around the world. Through our subsidiaries, PRA Group collaborates with customers to help them resolve their debt and improve their financial futures. Next slide. Over the past 27 years, our founders have demonstrated a proven track record of success, effectively navigating the company through challenging economic times and environments, including the global financial crisis and the COVID-19 pandemic. In fact, PRA Group recently received a Stevie Award from the American Business Awards for the effectiveness of its COVID-19 response, and was also recognized in the 2022 International Business Awards, receiving another Stevie Award for Management Team of the Year. Next slide. PRA Group's expansion into Europe, Canada, South America, and Australia make us one of the only truly global companies in the industry. In the 2 decades since listing with NASDAQ, PRA Group has grown its estimated remaining collections from $200 million in 2002 to over $5 billion at the third quarter of 2022. The company's total revenues also increased from $56 million in 2002 to more than $1 billion in 2021, which represented a record year for PRA Group in terms of collections, revenue, cash efficiency, and net income. Next slide. Our success is rooted in our commitment to doing things the right way for the right reasons with a long-term focus. That means also making an impact in the communities in which we live and work. And as a Virginia-based global company, we are proud to play an active role in growing regional innovation and entrepreneurship through RVA 757 Connects. Thank you.
Thank you, Laura. Appreciate your support, being on our board, also for the tremendous support that PRA Group has given our organization. We appreciate it. Thank you so much for that introduction into your company.
You're welcome.
Let me tell you all about a little bit about what's going on with RVA 757 Connects. As I mentioned before, RVA 757 Connects is an organization that's bringing the power of convening, connecting, and collaborating. It's a nonprofit organization, as I mentioned, that's dedicated to improving the economic success and the quality of life for everyone in the Richmond, which is RVA, and Hampton Roads, which is 757 regions. We are a network of leaders representing businesses, community, and higher education. We're advancing the Richmond and Hampton Roads mega region as the I-64 Innovation Corridor. As you can see, we're pursuing several different focus or priority areas. One of them is to spearhead the efforts to get the Richmond Hampton Roads mega region designated as a global internet hub. But we needed a strategic plan to make that happen, and we're working on that. We're developing one now as we speak. The planning process started about 7 months ago, back in the middle of last year. We've been meeting regularly. We established a steering committee that's been meeting. We expect that that should be completed. Our efforts should be completed sometime in March. As I mentioned, we have the steering committee. Laura is on that steering committee as well. As you can see from this chart, we've hired 2 consultants to help formulate key action plans. We're getting input from soon-to-be released studies on data centers from the VEDP and from the Hampton Roads Alliance. We're getting insights from George Mason University on return on investment on new jobs that have been created. And we're getting input and suggestions from steering committee members and what our own research has shown. The idea is to bring all this together in a comprehensive strategic plan, which we hope we will pull together. We're having one last meeting at the end of February, and we hope to pull all that together. As you can see, we met just last week at the Meta Data Center in Eastern Henrico County. It was a fascinating facility for those who were able to get a tour of the facility beforehand, before we actually held our meeting. And you can learn more about this initiative if you want to on our website, globalinternethub.org. The website not only serves as a resource or repository for anyone to follow our programs, but also and research findings, but also to follow what we're doing as well. It's a quite helpful website. We are quite on our way of becoming a global internet hubs. Internet hubs deliver many advantages to create the opportunities to build a growing and sustainable 21st century economy. It kind of started, all of this started back in 2012 when Hurricane Sandy caused so much destruction to the New York coastline that it prompted development of a 3rd East Coast landing site. In 2018, Marea Cable brought the first ultra-high-speed fiber cable from Bilbao, Spain to Virginia Beach. And then a few months later, the Barusa subsea cable came in from Brazil to Virginia Beach. The mega region has many assets in place needed to become a global internet hub. We just need to figure out how we can pull it all together. Because as I mentioned, coming ashore at Virginia Beach, there are 3 subsea cables now coming in, one from Spain, one from France, and the other one from Puerto Rico and Brazil. There's one planned from South Africa, and there are 4 more cable landings are planned to land there in Virginia Beach. Plus, we have the Confluence cable as well that would go up and down the East Coast of the U.S. These deep sea cables connect into Henrico County, where Meta is, which is the Facebook parent company, which has invested more than $1 billion in a 2 million square foot data center campus. The first phase of that data center opened in 2020, and the second phase is opening now this month as we speak. Next door is the the QTS Richmond Network Access Point, this is the world's fourth largest data center, and QTS is underway now to double the size of that particular facility. Another part of the mega region's internet infrastructure is the location of the DKIX Data Central Neutral Internet Exchange Point here in the Richmond region. The German-based technology company has established 3 locations in the Richmond area, 2 in Henrico and 1 in Hanover, for these exchange points. DKIX operates similar exchange points in only 4 other U.S. markets: New York, Dallas, Chicago, and Phoenix. Another one of our priorities, which brings us to today's webinar topic, is the development and the support of the development of high-growth industry clusters. High-growth industry clusters was one of the findings from the I-64 Innovation Corridor Opportunity Study that was funded in part by a grant by Go Virginia that we did in late 2020 and 2021 and early 2022. Thanks again to Go Virginia for supporting that grant. The full report, if you want to see it, is on the RVA 757 Connect's website. If you go to the website /innovation, it'll take you to that. Check it out if you have an opportunity. One part of the report talks about these 4 high growth industry clusters, one of them being, of course, the pharmaceutical manufacturing life sciences cluster. Opportunity study talks about how if we significantly grow this particular cluster category, it could create major job engine for the I-64 Innovation Corridor. So for instance, just this morning, Governor Youngkin announced that the engineering pharmaceuticals, which is a pharmaceutical engineering and manufacturing company dedicated to advancing cost-effective and state-of-the-art medicine, will be investing $6.1 million to expand its operations in Danville, Virginia. And that brings us to today's webinar on the part of the pharmaceutical cluster in the Richmond-Petersburg region. We'll turn momentarily to our speakers to learn more about what Civica is doing, not only in Petersburg, but also in Chesterfield County. The nonprofit is nearing completion of a 140,000 square foot state-of-the-art pharmaceutical manufacturing facility in Petersburg that will produce insulin products and that are sold at affordable prices. Civica has said that it intends, maybe also make mention that Civica is also constructing a 50,000 square foot laboratory at the Meadowville Technology Park in Chesterfield County to conduct quality testing and development of its new products. Civica has said that it's committed to offering the insulin products at its lowest sustainable prices, selling insulin to consumers at no more than $30 per vial or $55 for 5 pens, approximately a 90% reduction from the current list price. The Petersburg plant and the R&D facility in Chesterfield County will help strengthen and advance pharmaceutical manufacturing hub here in the Richmond-Petersburg region. There are other pharmaceutical groups in the region, including Virginia Commonwealth University's Medicine for All and Flow Corporation. These organizations, along with other groups and agencies, have formed a coalition called the Alliance for Building Better Medicine. And we'll learn more about that from one of our speakers today. So let me introduce our 2 speakers. Alan Cockle is the Senior Vice President of Public Policy at Civica. He also leads policy for Civica Script, which is the Civica affiliate created to bring down pharmacy drug costs for consumers. He's a clinical pharmacist by training, but he's also spent many years as a journalist. Also with us is Joy Polfron. She's the new executive director, and the first executive director, I should say, of the Alliance for Building Better Medicine, which is a cluster of advanced pharmaceutical manufacturers and researchers in the Richmond-Petersburg region. Prior to joining the Alliance late last year, Polfron worked in health innovation and entrepreneurship at Virginia Commonwealth University and at VCU Health, including as director of health innovations at the VCU Da Vinci Center. So let me also remind everybody, if you do have questions, please use the chat function. And now I'm going to turn the program over to Alan. Alan?
Thank you, Greg. And thanks to RVA 757 Connects for the opportunity to be with you today. I want to tell you about the things you mentioned, the Quality Affordable Insulin Project and what we're doing down in Petersburg. But in order to get us there, let me take a couple minutes and I'll just tell you a little story about the origin of Civica. So Civica is a company that really is built around a mission and is a response to a particular problem. And if you go to the next slide, the problem we were created to tackle is the problem of drug shortages. So, go back one. So over at least 15 years now, there has been a chronic problem of a whole lot of generic drugs just simply not being reliably available in the traditional pharmaceutical marketplace. The FDA keeps a drug shortages list. The Association of Hospital Pharmacists keeps a list. And at any given time, there are dozens, sometimes even hundreds of drugs on that list that are simply not available. These are essential products, old products, long off patent, low margin drugs, but absolutely essential to running a healthcare system. And at any given time, those aren't available. And when drugs aren't available, that causes patient harms, causes procedures to have to be rescheduled, people miss treatment, hospitals have to switch to other regimens, which creates risk and inefficiency. And every hospital in the country probably has a pharmacist who spends a chunk of his or her time, or sometimes more than one person, trying to source drugs that simply aren't available through usual channels. And so after years of this, a group of health systems and 3 philanthropic organizations came together. And they said, clearly this market is not fixing itself. And so if we want a different outcome, we have to do something differently. And so they created Civica. So go to the next slide. So Civica is a generic drug company, but a little different. No, go back one, please. A little different from most. It's a non-stock, non-profit generic drug company with a mission specifically around making medications available and affordable to everyone. So if you go to the next slide. So today we have 55 health systems that are, no, go back one, please, that are members of Civica. They account for about 1 in 3 hospital beds in the country. And we're set up so that any health system or hospital can join on a very accessible basis. And I want to flag down there that VCU Health is one of our hospital members. If you go to the next slide. So we have been in business for 4 years. To date, we have delivered 110 million vials of sterile injectable drugs to hospitals, enough to treat about 45 million patients. As I say, we're serving about 1 in 3 hospital beds in the country, about 1,500 hospitals, and we're delivering 70 drug products now. And we do a number of things that are different from the traditional model. And I won't spend a lot of time on them, except to say, because our mission is supply chain resiliency, we really emphasize the quality of sourcing, the quality of manufacturing, and we maintain a physical reserve stockpile of roughly 6 months inventory of each of these drugs, so that if we have an interruption in supply or a surge in demand, as we saw at the start of the pandemic, where overnight we had a 300% jump in demand for drugs, we're able to keep supplying without interruption. And we also have something that's really unusual, which is a one-price model. So a hospital in rural Virginia with 20 beds would pay the same price for drugs as a health system that has 200 hospitals. We lock that price in, and our members enter long-term purchase contracts, which provides stability in the market. So if you go to the next slide, and this just gives you, I said we're doing about 70 drugs now. This gives you a sense of some of the products we're making. So it's really across the range of therapeutic categories, a broad range of drugs used in intensive care medicine, acute care, emergency departments, and so on. Mostly sterile injectables, because that's where a lot of the problem in shortages comes from. One thing I didn't say, it's another difference between Civica and other companies, is we don't choose the drugs based on the margin or the return on investment. We actually have a committee of physicians and pharmacists from the hospitals, and they prioritize what drugs they need us to supply based on which ones are in shortage or they're having trouble sourcing. So if we go forward one slide. So as we've been on this mission to address drug shortages, We have also, of course, heard over and over, what can you do about price? And everyone knows that drug costs are a real challenge for lots of Americans. And so we've started an affiliate organization called Civica Script. And the mission of Civica Script is to lower the cost for consumers at the pharmacy counter. And in the same way that Civica was formed in partnership with hospitals, Civica Script was formed in partnership with health plans. Initially 18 Blue Cross Blue Shield plans. We've since added Anthem and HCSC and some other founding members. And so Civica Script is still in the generic or off-patent space, but there are a lot of places now, even though there's theoretically competition in the market, where consumers are facing really high out-of-pocket costs, hundreds or thousands of dollars, and where we think we can bring a solution that will help consumers with those costs. And that brings us to insulin. We have, I should say, we've launched one drug under Civica Script, which is a cancer drug. A typical Medicare Part D fill for this drug would be $3,200 for a month's supply. Our selling price is $160. So it gives you a sense of the impact we're looking to have. So if we go to the next slide, we have announced that we will be making 3 insulin products. So insulin, as you probably know, is a drug that's been around for 100 years. 8 million Americans depend on it. It's life-sustaining for people with diabetes. And yet increasingly, many of those people are unable to afford it. Certainly if you're uninsured or underinsured, but even for folks with good health coverage, there are situations in which insulin, because of the year-on-year increase in list price, is really becoming unaffordable or challenging. And in some studies, up to 25% of people cut their dose or don't fill prescriptions because cost is a barrier to access. If we go to the next slide. So Civica, go to the next slide, Greg. Civica will be manufacturing insulin in Petersburg, and we'll be making insulin, 3 insulins there, Glargine, Lantus, and Aspart. Those correspond to the brand names, or Glargine, Lispro, and Aspart, sorry, corresponding to the brand names of Lantus, Humalog, and Novolog. And the 2 of those are short-acting insulins. One's a longer-acting insulin, but together they account for most daily insulin use in the US. We're going to make those both in vials and in pre-filled pens. And as you said in your introduction, we are going to sell those at a much lower cost than the list price of the insulins that are available today. So those are products which, $300 a vial would be the sort of typical list price. We'll be at $30 a vial, and that includes the cost of distribution and what we think is a fair margin for the pharmacy that's dispensing the drug, and not more than $55 for 5 pens. And so that is intended. And the other thing, as with Civica drugs, there's just one price here. So the retail pharmacy marketplace is characterized by a lack of transparency and often very high list prices, and then big rebates, which go to the PBMs or the health plans. But if you're a consumer paying out of pocket, you don't benefit from that structure. In fact, it harms you because you end up paying a lot. So Civica insulins just have this one transparent price that's available to everybody. It's so transparent that we're actually going to have a QR code on the vial that says you should never pay more than $30 for a vial of Civica insulin. If we go to the next slide. I should say that the Civica insulin, the development of the product is being funded by our foundation. So we have philanthropic funders who are contributing to the cost. Unlike a small molecule drug, insulin is a biologic. It's a considerably more costly product to develop. And so a number of funders have come together to contribute to the development costs. And we are still raising funds for that, but we're confident that we're going to get there. But these are organizations that just share the mission of fixing this chronic problem that bedevils so many people who need this drug for their lives. So we go to the next slide. So I've said we'll be making this in Petersburg. Here's a schematic of the manufacturing facility that we are building in Petersburg. The major construction is now complete, and the filling equipment is two of the three bays are installed, and we're commencing validation and commissioning this year. This is a facility, it's 140,000 square feet. It'll bring about 200 jobs to Petersburg, and it has the capacity to do 90 million vials, 50 million pre-filled syringes a year, and we'll have a third bay, which will have a high-speed line for filling insulin cartridges. So we're staffing up there now. If you go to the next slide, we've got some pictures of the facility. So that was a schematic there. You can see an aerial view, relatively recent, of the plant and some interior shots. Some of these are a bit dated. I think that hole in the wall where we're putting some filling equipment in is closed up now. And you see some of the filling equipment and some of the folks working on it. And I put the Civica careers URL there. We are hiring up. We have about, I think, 77 employees in Virginia now. But as I say, we have a lot of positions open across the spectrum, from operators through to engineers and so on. If we go to the next slide. So that's the Civica manufacturing facility in Petersburg. We also recently announced that we'll be building a new laboratory facility at Chesterfield, which will create another 51 jobs in Virginia. And if you go to the next slide, Greg. So that lab is in Chesterfield County, about halfway between Petersburg and Richmond. It's in a technology park. It's where the Lego facility is being built, actually. And that'll be about a 60,000 square foot building, which will be home to laboratory services for the Civica manufacturing facility, both to do quality and release testing for products coming out of that manufacturing facility. Oh, and by the way, I talked about insulin. I should emphasize there are several dozen generic drug products also in development that will be manufactured in that facility for our hospitals. The other part of that, so half of that building roughly will be for Civica Lab. We'll also do research and development work there for new products to be manufactured in Petersburg. And then the other half of the space will be leased to VCU, to a scale-up development center run by Medicines for All out of VCU, where they will take bench scale reactions and scale them up to production scale. And that's something that has been funded through an economic development grant, which I won't talk much about because Joy Paula-Ferron, our next speaker, is going to talk about that. But it's part of this effort by the Alliance for Building Better Medicine to grow the pharma cluster in the region. So the architecture RFP for the lab is out right now. Construction probably in April, and site work to start in May. So that's all I had to run through. You can go to the next slide. Thanks for the opportunity. And as I say, it's a mission-driven nonprofit, and our policy 0.0 is to do what's in the best interest of patients. And so we certainly invite everyone to join us on that journey. Thank you.
Alan, before we go to Joy, let me just reemphasize a point you made. So when will insulin be available to consumers from your facility in Petersburg? And will we get it directly from you, or will we go through a pharmacy, or how will that work?
Yep, great questions, Greg. So the process of developing any drug, but especially a biosimilar, is fairly time consuming. So we are still 2 years away, which is short in terms of biosimilar development from launching the first insulin out of that facility. And yes, our intent is to have that available through regular pharmacy channels. So hopefully people will be able to go wherever they're getting their prescriptions now and get Civica insulin.
Great, super. Alan, I'm sure we'll have some more questions for you after Joy makes her presentation. Joy, this is a great segue, and Alan mentioned the Alliance for Building Better Medicine and the big federal grant that this pharmacy cluster in the Richmond Petersburg area received last year. So I will turn it over to you now.
Super. Thank you, Greg. And thank you for the opportunity to speak about this work, and especially to to follow the presentation from Alan about Civica's work, because it's for me deeply inspiring to hear their mission, and that they've been at this for 4 years and how much incredible work they have accomplished, and continue to set really ambitious but realistic and achievable goals that can change the shape of how pharmaceuticals are received by all of us from an access perspective, on a national scale. So it's pretty incredible. So I'm Joy Polifrone. I'm the new executive director, and as Greg said, the first executive director. There was an interim executive director, Jeff Gallagher, who really laid the foundation for the development of this alliance. And we've been around for a little less than a year, but there's a backstory to that. So I think it's really important to start by talking about the need, and Alan touched on much of this, but if you go to the next slide, Greg. This is a picture taken from a colleague last week. So if you've been in a pharmacy recently, if you have children and you're interested in getting a vial of Motrin or Tylenol, but especially Motrin, you will probably not be able to find it. So a colleague sent me this picture yesterday saying that she had a child at 105-degree fever and needed to alternate between Motrin and Tylenol and couldn't find Motrin in 3 different pharmacies. So when we talk about the drug shortages and where they are coming to impact many people, there's very few of us that could imagine how unpleasant it would be to have a child who has a fever and have no access at the moment from a pharmacy, in your backyard, to the drug that you need. If you go to the next slide. So it's an urgent and important need that the Alliance is really positioned to try to support addressing. And it's not a new one. As Alan mentioned, this isn't something that cropped up overnight. It's not actually a consequence of the pandemic. The pandemic and several other things that have happened recently have highlighted the urgency and the importance. But virtually all medicines that we have or that we take, especially the generics that are most commonly taken in the US and the over-the-counter medicines, we rely on overseas production for their manufacture. And specifically the key starting materials of many of these drugs. So those are the ingredients that are used to generate the active pharmaceutical ingredients. You can think of them as, I refer to them as like the coriander in the recipe. They're required to be able to make a really nice, a nice dish maybe, but they're not necessarily the things that you would think of when you look at a bottle of Motrin. They're not the active pharmaceutical ingredients, but they are required to produce those active pharmaceutical ingredients. Nearly all of those are sourced outside the US. So when we talk about advanced pharmaceutical manufacturing supply chain, we're talking about both the key starting materials and the active pharmaceutical ingredients and the finished formulations that Alan just talked about. And all 3, many of which, 73% really, are manufactured overseas. And so when we think about this and we talk about the challenge that we're trying to address in this region, it's not a challenge that one region in the country could address. It's a challenge that on a national scale, we need leaders like Civica to step forward and take a piece of the challenge and run with it and set ambitious goals. But this is many decades in the making. And it's something that's caused by cost pressures, environmental regulation, and really powerful, aggressive foreign investment in the development of these industries. And when I say powerful, I mean very thoughtful and intentional investment by different parts of the world in saying, we're going to build pharmaceutical manufacturing here. And while that was happening in other parts of the world, we were doing research and development in the United States. We were doing work in the pharmaceutical space, but we weren't necessarily doing work in the manufacturing. And so, as you heard from Alan, the US healthcare market, the providers and especially patients face shortages in medicines, and this puts risk into the entire system. When we think about taking care of a toddler that has a 105-year-old fever, or somebody who has diabetes, or somebody who has an advanced cancer that needs a drug in order to survive. Next slide, please. So the Alliance's goal is to bring together the organizations that are trying to solve this problem in this region. So we're working collaboratively to impact the research and development, the advanced pharmaceutical manufacturing, the workforce development, the infrastructure needed to build advanced pharmaceuticals and key starting materials and finished formulations, communicating about the problem space, and developing a national supply chain that we are a piece of sourcing and solving for this challenge of advanced pharmaceutical manufacturing. And what's really important about this work is that it's not one group that could ever solve these problems. It really takes the expertise and the collaboration and active participation of many minds and many organizations to come together and address the challenges in the end-to-end advanced pharmaceutical manufacturing supply chain. And we're really fortunate here in this region to have many of the pieces, but we need many more to be able to move to a space where we have more surety of supply on all fronts. Next slide, please. So I referred to this a moment ago, that we've had quite a bit of development in the US when it comes to that top line of bubbles on the slide. So we've got research and discovery, clinical development, manufacturing and supply chain, at least the first line of it, launch and commercialization, and post-market surveillance and patient support. Those are typically happening in the US. But when you look at what's listed beneath that, sourcing, manufacturing, distribution, delivery, patients, essentially the first four pieces of the bottom part of the chain aren't typically done here. What that also means is that we don't necessarily have the skilled workforce to do the work in advanced pharmaceutical manufacturing. We don't necessarily have the volume of individuals who can do the advanced science in order to reformulate chemistry so that it can be more ecological and also cost effective in order to do advanced pharmaceutical manufacturing here. And so the gaps that have been identified by this group of individuals were identified over a year-long planning process that was funded by Go Virginia to really say, what would the strategy be for all of us to work together and bring in others to solve the challenge of reshoring key elements of the manufacturing supply chain here in the US. Next slide, please. These members are a cross-section of very different groups that you might not necessarily see sitting around a table working on a strategic plan together. We've got Activation Capital as the convener, and the Alliance for Building Better Medicine is a program of activation capital. The city of Richmond, the city of Petersburg, Virginia State University, Civica, as you've heard from, Flow, which you heard from maybe a year ago, Medicines for All Institute, which I'll come back to in a second because I want to speak to the really incredible work that they're doing, the Community College Workforce Alliance, the Greater Richmond Partnership, VCU College of Engineering, Virginia Gateway Region, VEDP, AMPEC Fine Chemicals, US Pharmacopoeia, and Walmart. And I'm reading each of these organizations because I hope that as I name all of them, it lands with you that it's a really unique thing for these many individual organizations to come together to work on solving a large collective problem like this, and how significant it was that the first 3 rows of them came together to solve this problem through planning work, also worked together to establish 6 projects that could be submitted to the Economic Development Administration for additional funding, which I'll talk about in just a moment. And that the planning and the thoughtful collaboration of these groups working together is work on top of all of their other work. So their work to collaborate with one another to solve these problems is a shared investment in reshoring manufacturing, but especially solving the supply chain problems for patients and families and physicians that are trying to care for them. The 2 additional members to the Alliance just came on board in the fall, US Pharmacopoeia and Walmart. And I think they're really important to mention specifically because they bring a different part of the supply chain to bear in some of the work that we're doing. US Pharmacopoeia is a standards organization that has an international footprint. They're based in Maryland, but they work globally in setting standards for about 25% of medicines that are manufactured globally. So they look at the process of the chemistry development in order to make sure that there's purity and high quality coming out of each of the steps in the process. When we talk about doing advanced pharmaceutical manufacturing, and we think about changing the chemistry, it's really important that we have a partner in this process who understands how do we assess and validate that that change chemistry is going to result in the molecules that we would like to have in the finished formulation product. So having someone who's working alongside the chemists as they're developing the synthetic pathways and alongside the chemical engineers as they're designing the processes is a critical asset to this coalition. Additionally, Walmart has joined the coalition and has made a significant investment in looking at some of the key attributes of pharmaceutical manufacturing and five other areas. It's one of five rather areas that Walmart is working on strengthening US manufacturing for. And pharmaceuticals is a very important part of the work that they do for their customers globally. And as an organization, they have a tremendous understanding of the footprint of customer need when it comes to pharmaceuticals on a national and international scale. And so they bring a lot of knowledge to bear in what the need is from a pharmaceutical manufacturing perspective. And then I want to come back to Medicines for All because I think it's a really key asset that we have here in the region and in the state. And the team there looks at the chemistry of an active pharmaceutical ingredient and assesses whether or not they can do it better, faster, cheaper, and smarter, sort of to simplify it a bit. And that's a really important attribute because as some of the facts that I presented earlier represented, this is not a new challenge that pharmaceutical manufacturing has been outside the US predominantly for the better part of the last 30 years. What it also means is that advances in the chemistry haven't necessarily been incentivized. So creating new methods to create old drugs is not something that's easy to justify an investment in if the typical methods are working fine for where they're being manufactured. But if we're trying to reshore manufacturing, it's really critical that we're reshoring it in smarter, better, more ecological, and more economical ways. And Medicines for All Institute is a key contributor in that process and has done a tremendous body of work with the Gates Foundation. They've done work on COVID drugs as well, and they've certainly been a key attribute in looking at how do we do the work of reshoring pharmaceutical manufacturing through advanced technologies. Next slide, please. So this was referenced before, and it's a really interesting thing to talk about the Economic Development and Administration Build Back Better Regional Challenge win, because what is at the foundation of these 6 integrated projects, which are the building blocks of beginning to have a strong end-to-end pipeline in advanced pharmaceutical manufacturing here in this region. The foundation of this is the planning grant that I mentioned before, but also an implementation grant from Go Virginia. And had these things not been underway when the Economic Development Administration announced the Build Back Better Regional Challenge, this coalition of individuals would not have been well positioned or as well positioned to be able to successfully define 6 integrated projects and win all 6 of them. So if you go to the next slide, please. The first project is water and wastewater. And I start with this one because in order to be able to do this type of manufacturing here in this region or in the US, it's really important that the infrastructure exists underground as well as above ground. And so in places like Petersburg that have been historically distressed communities, addressing infrastructure challenges for water and wastewater is not something that they would have been able to do without the support of the state and this EDA Build Back Better grant. And so it's very important that this was funded, but also very important that Petersburg has the capacity to allow for Civica to be up and running, but then many other pharmaceutical companies to come to the region, were that to be something that was interesting to them as well. So creating that infrastructure is important. Next slide, please. The supply chain project that was funded through the Build Back Better Regional Challenge Grant includes an assessment of where we are today in the supply chain. What do we have in the region? What do we have in the Mid-Atlantic? What do we have on the East Coast? What do we have nationally? And how do we develop a plan for a supply chain that can support the future state of an advanced pharmaceutical manufacturing cluster here in the region? What do we need to have in 3 years? What do we need to have in 10 years? And then how do we start making sure that those individuals who have the assets and the capabilities on a national scale or on a regional scale are looking at doing that work here in partnership with these companies who are also investing in the region? This is an important project to really map the future state of the supply chain and to start to build what components of it need to exist in our backyard for its success here. Next slide, please. The Innovation Center project is at the front end of the research and development pipeline. So when we think about the slide that I showed earlier and having that R&D component and new chemical synthesis methodologies that might come out of laboratory settings, and then have the opportunity to be folded into intellectual property that then can be spun up as a new company even, or IP that could be acquired by larger companies. We need to have the ability to support those types of startup opportunities. And we have a shortage in the state and in the region in particular in wet lab space in order to be able to support startups like this. So this Innovation Center project is a project that will build about 100,000 square foot of lab space here in the Biotech Park, adjacent to the Medicines for All Institute and the new labs that have been opened by USP and Flow. Next slide, please. The Scale Up Development Center project is one that Alan mentioned. And when we think about doing things from bench all the way to clinic, one of the challenges is how do you take things that are in the research and development phase and ensure that you work out all of the challenges that you need to before you go into a full manufacturing facility. So building a scale-up development center that is in between the R&D capability set in Richmond and the manufacturing capability set in Petersburg allows for just that scale-up development opportunity. What it also allows for us to have is a place where people can learn about the steps in that process alongside the development work that's happening to take something from an R&D setting to a manufacturing capability set. Next slide, please. Next slide, please.
No, I'm fine, just sorry. There we go.
It's okay. The last two projects are the ones that I will say I'm personally most passionate about, because when we look at the EDA Build Back Better Regional Challenge Grant, one of the things that it asked of us was to ensure that the work that we were doing were benefiting communities that would not necessarily be typically represented, and also communities that have been historically distressed and hadn't had access to these types of opportunities. And so the Talent Pipeline project that has been developed and designed through CCWA and a partnership with Brightpoint and Reynolds Community Colleges is a tremendous asset that we're bringing to this region, and that will benefit beyond just the region, because the certificate programs for advanced pharmaceutical manufacturing that are being developed through this Talent Pipeline project are ones that can move to any of the different community colleges in the state. And so when we think about building a capability set, this Talent Pipeline project to allow opportunities for individuals who might not have had exposure to or an understanding of what these roles are ever in their experience. They've never seen an advanced pharmaceutical manufacturing environment. They don't know what those words mean. The goal of this project is to both create awareness and access to career opportunities that will allow them to have a different pathway if they so desire. The next project, the next slide, please, is a joint engineering degree program between VSU, Virginia State University, and VCU. And again, in partnership with the last project and this one, we're creating a pathway that allows people to move through into advanced degrees where they desire. And I like to think about the workforce development projects as having an opportunity for on-ramps at any point in someone's career. And so this program allows for the development of 5 joint degree programs in engineering applications. It allows people to move from VSU, an HBCU in Petersburg, into programming in VCU that can run through master's programs or all the way to doctoral programs. And when we think about what needs to exist in a region for manufacturers like Civica to be successful, Alan mentioned the jobs that need to exist, but some of the jobs that we really need to exist are at that tail end of the capability set. So doctoral degrees, postdoctoral, researchers, and individuals who have the ability to do that work at the bleeding edge. And we need the full range of capabilities. And so these 2 programs are instrumental in that. And next slide, please. So for the Alliance, what's next? We are in execution mode. You saw 6 projects there. In total, 53.9 million with state and other matching funds, over 111 million invested in this region and this coalition of integrated partners. And there's a lot of execution work to do on each of these projects, and coordinated execution work to identify where we have gaps and where we need help. So that's where growing partnerships is really important. And if there are things that, as you're looking at these slides, or you're thinking about some of the projects that are underway, you have ideas or connections that you can help us to make to help this community of individuals go further, faster together. I'd be very happy if you reached out to me about those. And then the last one is really thinking about intelligent manufacturing systems. So as we look at the growth of what we hope will be a national footprint in advanced pharmaceutical manufacturing that changes the landscape of how we get our medicines, what we also have to consider is really up-leveling the capabilities of what we know is happening on a national scale. And so that's one of the things that we've started to press into is starting to get an understanding of what that might mean for looking at how medicines are manufactured and what role this region could play in really serving the nation. So thank you very much. Next slide, and that's it. If there are any questions, I'm very happy to entertain them.
So Joy, before we go to the questions from anyone that's on the call, let me just ask you, what kind of job growth do you think the Alliance can anticipate, for this cluster bringing to this area?
Yeah, so there's the direct job growth that you've heard about that's in the hundreds, sort of between Civica and AMPAC and Flow and others. There's direct job growth that's in the hundreds, several hundreds. But the indirect and induced job growth is significantly more than that, because these are quite high-paying jobs when you look across the possibility set. So when we mapped a 10-year plan for a research and development initiative that would grow the cluster even further than I've already mentioned here, we anticipated close to 3,000 jobs, direct, indirect, and induced. And then there's all of the other things that wrap around that. So it's quite a significant job growth. But it's also a significant job growth when it comes to a particular industry that will then ripple out into the other spaces as well.
Good, great, thank you. So let me see, I see that in the chat we have some questions. I'm going to try to see if I can figure out some of these questions here. Are you able to share this? I guess this is going to go to Alan. Are you able to share the average compensation for the 200 jobs in Petersburg?
Yeah, Greg, I answered that one in the chat. I don't have the exact number right in front of me, but it's substantially above the median wage in the community.
Okay.
I can just mention one of the numbers
Sure.
that we had researched recently was that for an average advanced pharmaceutical manufacturing technician, it's above it's around $50,000 a year is an average annual salary, and it ranges based on geographic region, but it's quite above the median.
And you may have already answered this, Alan, but the other question was, I've had Mitch asks, I've had business dealings with food distributors in the past and worry about the distribution fees and insulin shipment. If the cost of $30, have you included the estimate of distribution fees, shelving fees by the distributors?
We have built into that number an assumption on the cost of getting it to the pharmacy, the distributor cost, as well as a pharmacy margin there.
And another question is it the aim to recruit companies in the Petersburg area or to build new companies? How can Petersburg compete with established markets like the Research Triangle in North Carolina? So Alan or Joy, do either one you want to take that?
Joy, do you want to take that one?
Sure. I think the question of competition is an interesting one when it comes to the different regions. We have a pretty challenging national problem to solve, and there definitely are capability sets in RTP around pharmaceutical development. But the unique assets that we have are different than what exists in that part of the country. And so I think it's really looking at what RTP is doing and how can we find complementary opportunities versus competition with them directly.
So there's another question from Brian, and maybe this is to you, Alan, is the push to place the $35 price cap on insulin failed late last summer, perhaps because it was part of the Build Back Better initiative. Any idea if standalone bill might be introduced in 2023, and if so, how would that affect Civica? I see that John Hawley has introduced his Cap Insulin Prices Act with a $25 cap a few days ago. Josh Hawley, I'm sorry.
Yeah, so a couple of things there. So Congress did pass with the Inflation Reduction Act in September, a cap on the cost of insulin only in the Medicare program. So that helped some people who were facing high out-of-pocket costs, particularly in the deductible phase of Medicare Part D. But it leaves a lot of folks still facing those costs. And even in a best case scenario, Congress doesn't really have the tools to cover all health plans, to dictate the structure of all health plans. There are only certain ones that fall under federal jurisdiction. And those sorts of policies also don't affect the selling price of insulin. They really go to benefit design in a health plan. So I think in any scenario, there is still a need for a low net cost, quality, affordable insulin in the market. As to what might happen in the current Congress, that's always hard to predict, but I think if you're following the news closely, most observers don't expect this to be a Congress that's going to move a lot of legislation. Compared to last year, we've moved to a situation of divided government where different parties are controlling the two chambers, which is not to say it can't happen. There's certainly bipartisan interest in tackling insulin costs, but I think it is going to be a challenging legislative environment.
So Alan, let me ask you, why did Civica choose Petersburg? Why this area for your operations?
Yeah, it's a great question. So, obviously Virginia, maybe not obviously, Virginia is a good state to do business in. In the sort of tables of business-friendly states, Virginia ranks very highly. It is a state with a skilled and educated workforce and so on. So that's one answer. The other answer is that we have a partnership with Flow. And I didn't mention this in my presentation, actually, but our manufacturing facility in Petersburg is received substantial funding through a federal contract. Flow is the prime on that, and Civica is a subcontractor there. And part of what we have is a vision, as Joy talked about, of an end-to-end supply chain. So on one side of the road, you've got API manufacturing at Flow and at AMPAC, which is the former Boehringer Ingelheim campus. And right across the road, you've got a company making finished dosage form drugs for delivery to end users, and so that combination really was what brought us to Virginia.
Great. And Joy, let me ask you, what other areas of innovation do you see being important to the growth of this cluster?
I think one of the things that I mentioned earlier about the fact that much of the pharmaceutical manufacturing has happened outside the U.S. over years, and we haven't necessarily applied advanced manufacturing robotics and sort of the digital technology and design of sensor technology for pharmaceutical manufacturing. It hasn't all necessarily been applied at the bleeding edge of technology to this industry in the US. And so the opportunities to innovate in the AI space and in machine learning and designing how those chemical routes might be synthesized, but also how they might be manufactured through robotics and other capabilities that may or may not have been developed yet. The other piece of it is that with continuous flow and hybrid manufacturing models, there will be new ways of manufacturing some of these things at scale that will require innovations both on the floor and in the digital space around them. So there's quite a bit of opportunity to innovate around the industry.
Great. Well, Joy and also Alan, thank you so much for a very fascinating and interesting discussion on what's happening down in Petersburg and the whole Richmond-Petersburg region with this pharmaceutical cluster. Really do appreciate you taking the time out today to discuss this this topic with us. Let me just tell you, what are some things coming up next that we have on board. I just want to mention that we have, as I mentioned before, today's session will be available on our website and through our YouTube channel. I'll send out a link to everybody to let everybody know when that's available. And also to remind people, if you want to learn more about the Global Internet Hub, go to the globalinternethub.org website as well. And then next month, 1 month from today, we will have our next virtual innovation spotlight. I've got a topic. I'm just double checking to make sure I don't want to announce it until I've got triple confirmation from the speaker, but it should be a very fascinating topic as well. That'll be again a month from today on Wednesday, March the 1st, from noon to 1 o'clock. So I'll watch out to your emails on social media for that topic. Also, there's ways you can help us advance the RVA 757 Connects mission, and that's either to follow us, let people know about what we're doing, send me names and email addresses so we can add them to our database, suggest topics, and also invite me or John Martin, our CEO, to brief or talk to your business or organization. Again, thank you to everyone for attending. I also want to give a big thanks again to the PRA group for sponsoring us for this month's Virtual Innovation Spotlight. We really do appreciate that. Thank you to everyone for attending today, and we will see you next month, one month from today on Wednesday, March the 1st. Thanks again. Have a great day.